All right, we're live?
Almost.
Okay. You just let me know. All right, we're live. Hi, everybody. I know it's been a little bit since the last video I made, especially because I left you guys kind of on the edge. So last video that I made was discussing the gut-brain axis and the effect that the microbiome, our microbial populations that live in our bodies, how they affect our brain and mental wellness. So I talked a little bit about microbiome overgrowths, where certain organisms can become prolific and actually overgrow and become pathogenic. And then I left you guys yearning for the answers of how to correct an overgrowth. And so when you have, either low populations of good commensal bacteria or high populations of pathogenic or overgrown bacteria, you have what you call microbiome dysbiosis. And as you can see with this little chart here, some people like to, segment bacteria as, good or bad. That's certainly an oversimplification because some strains of bacteria can actually be considered good or commensal flora until they reach a certain point in their population growth, and then they might actually crowd out other species and strains of bacteria that are also an important part of that ecosystem. So I kind of just want to address that it's not really as simple as good or bad, but more complex than that. But for the sake of today, we can think about bacteria as being good or bad in the microbiome for now. So if we have an overgrowth of candida or a pathogenic bacteria of E. coli strain or Klebsiella pneumoniae, which is linked to Crohn's and arthritis, or something like Enterobacter or H. pylori, which is linked to stomach ulcers, what do we do about it? Is this something that we take antibiotics for? Well, sometimes antibiotics are prescribed for things of that sort, but generally antibiotics are going to be more disruptive to a microbiome that's already harboring pathogenic bacteria and should only be used if it's really a life-threatening infection. There are more gentle and natural ways to correct and rebalance your gut microbiome for the sake of whole body wellness, health and vitality, including brain and mental health. So, let me use an analogy to describe the ecology of our gut microorganism populations. So I'm a biologist, so I like to use metaphors from systems biology to describe the microbial dynamic in our bodies. So if you imagine that our gut microbiome is kind of like an African plain in the Sahara, or not the Sahara, the savannah. And you have all sorts of species of animals, and they all occupy some important niche in creating a sustainable ecological dynamic. And say in our little savannah, we have grasses, and we have zebras that eat the grass, and we have lions that eat the zebras, and then we have vultures that eat the remnants of the zebras that lions kill and eat. So say that there is an invasive species of beetle that comes into this African plain environment, and all of a sudden it starts wiping out all of the native grasses there, and the zebras are having trouble getting enough food to sustain their populations. So you're having dwindling zebra populations happening because the grass is not growing and proliferating in a healthy way. And this is going to affect the lions that feed on the zebras and affect the vultures that feed on the remnants of the zebras that the lions eat. So that's just an example of how one organism can create a cascading effect in an ecosystem. And this goes for the same in our microecosystem, in our gut, in our microbiomes. And if there's a pathogenic bacteria, or the beetle that's eating the grass in this case, it can proliferate and basically dominate an environment and create downstream effects that will cause problems for a lot of other species of organisms that are all codependent on each other for various things. So, a lot of people think, oh, well, I take probiotics. I don't have a problem with my microbiome's healthy. Probiotics are great, but there's a couple problems with probiotics. And I'll use, again, my African plains analogy. So, say we're having a problem and, there's a low lion population. And so they go, oh, okay, well, let's just put more lions in Africa. We'll breed lions at the zoo, and we'll just release them into the wild, and that will solve the problem of there not being enough lions, right? So, unfortunately, because the root of the problem wasn't addressed in the first place, aka the beetles eating all the grass, which is leaving a low population of zebra, which means there's not enough food to sustain a healthy lion population, adding more lions doesn't really solve the problem. But if you go in and eradicate the beetle, or somehow create a more robust environment that the grass can grow in, and aka create more zebra population sustainability and more food for the lions, that's how you solve the problem of there not being enough lions. The same goes for our gut bacteria. It's more about creating an environment that is going to be conducive to a balanced and sustainable diversity of microbes in your gut. And there are a variety of ways we can do this. And probiotics, while there is a lot of clinical research on them and they do have benefits, do not mishear me in this, they do have benefits, but they're considered transient, meaning that the benefits stop once you stop taking the probiotic. For whatever reason, probiotics don't seem to stick. They kind of go through your body, and they do have some effect which can be helpful in healing the gut, but they generally don't colonize in the gut. And so I'll kind of talk about what we actually need to do to create healthy colonization of microbial populations that are going to be conducive to us helping. So what do we do to get rid of these overgrown organisms? Well, there's a couple of different ways that we can approach this, and I recommend doing all of these things. I believe that doing these things in concurrent steps is a really effective way. And ultimately, the first thing you have to do is clear out the microbiome. You kind of have to kick everybody out and tell them to go somewhere else. Because one of the reasons that probiotics don't work is that you're already populated with a bunch of microorganisms, and you take a probiotics, and they're the new guys in town, and the the organisms living in your gut, they're not going to just abandon their house and be like, oh yeah, go ahead, take my spot. I don't need to be alive anymore. I can just go somewhere else and find some other symbiotic creature to live in. That's not how it works. Real estate in the gut is highly competitive, and you actually have to discharge bacteria from the lining of your gut in order to create real estate opportunity for new organisms to colonize and change the whole dynamic. So what I do first is what I call scorch the earth. And this is something they do with controlled forest fires. They'll burn a piece of land, because they find that when they burn everything down, it gives opportunity for biodiversity to return, because they've kind of wiped out some of the bullies in the environment that have just over-colonized and overgrown and are crowding out some of the other species that are having a harder time. So we can do the same thing with our gut microbiome. And I use my antimicrobial herbs mainly to do this. There's a variety of antimicrobial herbs that you can use, such as olive leaf, artemisia, which is Chinese wormwood, turmeric's antimicrobial, neem or malia, or morinda, which is also called noni fruits, oregano, thyme. Let's see, what else on my list? Chrysanthemum, golden thread, which has berberine in it, or is that the right word? It has some compound in it. It's highly antimicrobial that I can't think of the word at the moment. And there's hundreds of herbs that can be considered antimicrobial. And what's great about the herbs is they kill off bacteria, but not in the same sort of harmful way as an antibiotic. And they also have multiple compounds in them, so it's very unlikely for a bacterial population to develop resistance to an herb, because one, it's like they would have to develop a resistance to many compounds in the herb, and also each plant, an individual plant, even if it's the same species, varies in its chemical constituents. And also, if you're taking multiple herbs at once, generally they just don't stand a chance. And we're also, we've co-evolved with human beings consuming herbs and plants over thousands and thousands of years. So it seems as though the antimicrobial properties of herbs don't seem to wipe out commensal good bacteria as much, probably because the healthy bacteria that we are supposed to harbor has likely adapted and evolved over time to be able to tolerate some of these botanical compounds, seeing as how we have been using plants in our diet and in our medicine for so long as human beings. And so that's one way of killing off overgrowths and allowing opportunity for new colonization. Now, another really crucial piece to all of this is changing the diet. And step one is removing inflammatory foods that are irritating the gut and maybe creating permeability or leaky gut, which is giving ample opportunity for pathogenic microbes to take root and really thrive in an inflamed environment. A lot of times when people have microbiome dysbiosis, they find that eliminating wheat and dairy are really helpful. Sometimes things like the nightshade vegetables can be inflammatory for people. Sugar is definitely a big part of it. And part of the reason is a lot of these bugs eat sugar. And so when you are feeding them sugar, the organisms that thrive on those simple sugars are going to proliferate because they're like stoked. They're like, we have all this free food, this is awesome. And they'll start to overgrow and crowd out other bacteria that are really useful for things like extracting minerals from food, or making B vitamins as byproducts, or protecting your gut lining from pathogenic bacteria that can make you sick, perhaps bacteria that's on your food like E. coli. So it's really important to eliminate inflammatory foods and sugary foods in the diet. Some of these bacteria will actually reward you by releasing things like dopamine so that you'll continue to crave and eat sugar because they want you to keep eating sugar for them. And so they actually can really hijack your brain quite a bit in their own interest. So one thing that's really helpful is eliminating simple sugars and grains, and a ketogenic diet has been really helpful for me and a lot of other people in restoring regularity to the microbiome environment. Because a ketogenic diet, you basically deprive your body of glucose or any sort of simple carbohydrates, and your body switches over to utilizing ketone fat bodies as its fuel source, which is going to starve out a lot of these organisms because they can't switch over into ketosis. They can't use ketones as energy. They use sugar. So if they're overgrown, you starve them out by depriving your body of sugar, and your cells fare just fine. They switch over into this secondary version of metabolizing energy, and it's no problem. So ketogenic diet is a good thing to do. But again, I really think that changing the diet and using the antimicrobial herbs is really an important combination, because generally I find that each on their own isn't enough. They really have to co-occur to get an effective healing and reconstruction of your microbiome environment. And I also want to add too that the antimicrobial herbs, generally it takes several months of cycling on multiple herbs, like 2-week periods at a time, and that's something that I suggest you be under the care of a practitioner, such as a naturopathic doctor or a doctor that is working in functional medicine or integrative health, or an Ayurvedic practitioner, herbalist, nutritionist, somebody of that sort, because there are ways to harm yourself if you're taking, the herbs that aren't quite right for you, or you're taking them for too long, because they can be kind of hard on the body and the liver, especially because they're producing a lot of die-off symptoms of organisms being killed. So that's the whole clearing out process. Once you've eliminated a lot of the overgrown bacteria, you might actually be kind of at the point where you're feeling lethargic and stuff, because you've killed off a lot of guys in there, including the good bacteria. So now it's time to repopulate. And the way we do this is by feeding the foods that are going to harbor the growth of a healthy, balanced microbial population, aka not eating sugar, not eating inflammatory foods, but eating lots of healthy fiber and fats and complex carbohydrates and nutritional rich foods like vegetables and maybe fruits in moderation, because they are pretty sugary, and cultivating your microbial petri dish by feeding it what foods are going to encourage healthy bacteria to grow. Fibers are really great. So one of my favorite fiber supplements is arabinogalactan, which comes from the larch tree. Psyllium husk is also a really good one, or inulin, which is like a chicory fiber, or things that are high fiber foods like vegetables, or tiger nuts are really good, or sweet potatoes, even though they are a bit starchy. That starch is also considered fiber and food for bacteria. But you want to be really sure after you clear out that you're feeding your gut the foods that will make an environment that's conducive to a healthy, sustainable ecosystem. Now, this is the part where the probiotics come into play, and also fermented foods. But I really stress that the probiotics and the fermented foods, while they're not completely useless before clearing out the microbiome, they are much less effective. So please, I encourage you to do the herbal clearing and the dietary changes before bothering to spend tons of money on expensive kombuchas and probiotic supplements. So once you've kind of scorched the earth and you're ready to recolonize your microbiome, I suggest getting a multi-strain probiotic supplement. One of my favorites is a brand called Life Extensions, and their product is called Flora Assist, and it actually has bacteriophages in it, which is super cutting-edge technology that they're just starting to learn a lot about. And these bacteriophages, they're basically viruses that target specific strains of microorganisms. In this case, this supplement has specific viruses that are known to infect strains of E. coli that are known to inhibit the growth of good commensal bacteria in the gut. So these bacteriophages, they basically go and munch up very specific types of bacteria, and they clear out space in the gut so that the probiotic that you're now taking can actually colonize, because there's actually room, because we kicked some guys out by munching them up with bacteriophages. And so some of the rat research that's come about looking at probiotics with bacteriophages is that they increase the amount of colonization and presence of probiotic material in the gut by 10 to 40 times the amount, which is pretty significant, because a lot of people are taking probiotics and they're just going right through them and they're just kind of wasting their money. But with the bacteriophages, they really augment the efficacy and the likelihood that they will actually colonize and create a change in the microbiome environment as far as in a long-term way, versus just taking them and then having it be done once they're out of your system. So that's a supplement that I recommend. I also cycle through probiotic supplements because I notice that in the beginning I'll feel really great taking one, and then the effects kind of wane, and then I'll switch to another one that has different strains. And so I think really just allowing your body to have access to a variety of microbial strains through various foods and maybe even dirt. Like, if you ever have to take antibiotics, as soon as you're off, the first thing you should do is rub your hands in some healthy dirt and lick them, because there's a bunch of spore-forming soil-based organisms in the dirt that are also considered healthy for a microbiome to be in balance. So, with all of that said, I also want to just quickly touch on the fact that if you do all of this and your microbiome is in perfect synchronicity and is what you would consider to be balanced and healthy, but you're still having food reactivity or depression and anxiety or sorry, I got distracted, or you're still having GI symptoms, I think one thing to really consider is a lot of times the origin of these gut problems and this microbial imbalance is actually coming from the nervous system. And a lot of times it can be due to childhood trauma, or chronic stress at your job or whatever. Or it can be a stressor such as a chronic infection that's actually in your nervous system. Because, as I discussed before, there's this intimate connection between the gut and the brain. And they both communicate with each other. And the brain sends signals to the gut, which dictates digestion and the environment of the microbiome, which will influence what type of organisms live there. So, if your brain is stuck in this chronic stress response and is inflamed, which is usually the cause of things like depression, anxiety, or a lot of psychiatric illnesses, that is going to create problems for the microbiome that give just plenty of opportunity for pathogenic organisms to take root, because it creates an inflamed gut environment that is conducive to the way that they want to live. So, if you've done all these things and you're still not recovering, then please consider the fact that usually there is an emotional nervous system component to the gut problems. And this is something that's been investigated in scientific literature quite extensively at this point. We're seeing high incidences of aversive childhood experiences coinciding with the incidence of autoimmune conditions or GI problems, or Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis and things of that sort. So, next time I make a video, I plan to talk a little bit more about how to retrain a nervous system that is stuck in a chronic stress response. So, you work on your gut for now, and then next video I make, we can explore some tools in retraining the nervous system so that it stops sending signals to your gut and keeps it in a chronic state of imbalance and dysbiosis. Is there anyone that has any questions? Then please feel free to type it out. I don't know if anyone's actually watching, but I'm sure later people will be watching. So if you have a question, I really encourage you to ask it. Type it in the comments section, and I'd be happy to answer it to the best of my ability. If you are interested in a more in-depth guiding through the process of rebuilding your microbiome, I offer nutritional counseling services specifically for things like this, for autoimmune illnesses and mood disorders and such. And also, I encourage you to like my Entheozen page if you haven't already, so that you can get access to all these live videos when I post them. And I plan to upload them so that you can watch them at your own leisure anytime that you like. So, yeah, thanks for watching. Hopefully that wasn't too much rambling. I hope you learned something, and I hope you feel inspired to take care of your gut, because the key to a healthy brain is a healthy gut, and the key to a happy brain is a healthy brain. So, yeah, thanks for tuning in. I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.